Oh, goody.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Marvel Snap video. So in this one, we're going over today's new card, US Agent. US Agent is a 2-cost 3 power that reads ongoing. 4, 5, and 6 cost cards here have -3 power. So kind of like a inverse mini man thing, but with a little bit of an added bonus. Instead of being -2, he's -3, and he affects the top half of the curve rather than the lower half. Not going to sugarcoat this one. I think this is one of the worst cards ever released, maybe. It's really interesting. So if we think about Man-Thing, Man-Thing's a really cool card, but it's a card that has never really seen too much success. It's kind of fringe. It's not the worst card in the world, but it isn't that great. And Man-Thing has a much higher chance of hitting multiple of your opponent's cards than a card like this. Because, well, in a game with only 6 turns, it's very unlikely your opponent is going to have a plethora of 4, 5, and 6 cost cards. Now you could say, hey, well, if you hit one thing with this, it's a 2/6. If you hit 2 things with it, it's a 2/9. 2/9s are pretty good. But because this card is cheaper, typically it's a card you're going to want to be playing out earlier on in the game. You want to be curving out with it. And if you do curve out with it, your opponent can just choose not to play their big thing in that lane. Obviously, that does come with a little bit of value where you're kind of limiting your opponent's plays a bit, but this also affects you and your plays unless you're running away to turn off the effect with something like Luke Cage. It just seems very easy to play around, and if you aren't forcing your opponent to play around it, maybe by holding it for the final turn of the game, you're playing a 2/3 on the final turn, and that's usually not the best use of your resources. Plus, there's going to be some luck there in terms of guessing where your opponent is playing their big final card, unless you're going for some 4 or 5 drops that were played earlier on. This card just seems very niche and situational, and even in those situations, I'm not really sure it's actually justified taking up a deck slot. There are just better ways to get a 2/6, especially with the recent reintroduction of something like Angela. So yeah, this card's really bad. I think almost nobody should get this card unless you're okay getting a card that is more fringe, and some people like that. Some people like going after the cards that aren't necessarily viewed as powerful, require a little bit more build around, and hey, enjoy what you enjoy, but if you're trying to get the most out of your resources, US Agent does not seem to be it, and in my opinion is by far the weakest card of the month. In terms of the spotlight, it's not looking a whole lot better. So Mirage really has fallen by the wayside. Always been kind of a decent card, nothing too crazy, mainly seeing play in things like Loki. But with the recent change to Cable is now eating up that Mirage spot in a lot of decks, and he's doing it better, specifically in those decks that are running Baron Zemo. So this card really just doesn't see like any play right now, which is kind of unfortunate. And then Jeff goes in like every deck under the sun. Well, maybe not all of them, but a lot of them. Very flexible, one of the best 2-drops in the game just because of that nice flexibility. But the other 2 cards being so weak and niche means I probably wouldn't recommend opening this week. But yeah, that's the card. Let's take a look at our day 1 decks. Starting out, we have High Evolutionary, so makes sense to be using US Agent in a deck that cares about Affliction and has a bit of a payoff for that with Abomination. So we're running many of the good High Evo cards here in Misty Knight, Cyclops, Abomination, and Hulk. All very good cards there. Scorpion for a bit more Affliction. We're kind of all in on that theme. Same reason for Man-Thing. Luke Cage to turn off opposing Affliction, as well as make it so we don't have to worry about the downsides from our own US Agent or Man-Thing, which is always convenient. Opted to go for Red Hulk here as just another big top-end thing. I really liked having both Hulk and Red Hulk in these Evo style decks. However, if you don't have Red Hulk, I do think She-Hulk would also be a suitable replacement here. But yeah, nothing too crazy with this one. It's just a slightly different take on the High Evo deck. I'm not sure if it's even going to necessarily be better, to be perfectly honest, but if you really like giving your opponents a negative stats with as many ways as you can, this is probably the way to go about doing that. Then we have Toxic Sarah. So Toxic Sarah is a deck I've always kind of enjoyed. A little bit different take on the Sarah control style deck where, yes, we do have control pieces to deal with opponents' threats, but we also can kind of just punish them by giving them a bunch of negative affliction, as well as take advantage of cards like Lizard that normally would have a downside that we can mitigate ourselves with either Luke Cage or Enchantress. So yeah, very reactive deck. We have all the good tech here: Shang-Chi, Enchantress, Luke Cage, Killmonger, all very good at dealing with opposing threats. We are running Ghost in this version, particularly because of the resurgence of Kitty Pryde style decks. It is hard to throw priority versus those decks sometimes, so Ghost giving us a decent body and guaranteeing that we will be going last all the time. Very useful for a deck like this. Typhoid Mary is our one kind of go tall element, who we can turn off with either Enchantress or Luke Cage. Killmonger to deal with Kitty or any other powerful 1-drops. USA Agent and Man-Thing to inflict some negative stats on the opponent. Hazmat gets the job done there too. Zabu for some more increased cost reduction. Sarah because, well, it's a Sarah deck. And yeah, it's pretty straightforward. I think these are always kind of fun, again, if you like doing negative affliction stuff, but you want a more control-y game plan compared to the high evos big points game plan. This is a good way to go about doing that. And then the last deck of the bunch here is some Spectrum Copium. Yeah, Spectrum hasn't been good in a very long time, if ever. But if you do like ongoing cards and you want to use US Agent in that style of deck, I think this might be an okay way to do it. So we're pretty much an all-in ongoing deck. I mean, pretty much every card in this deck has ongoing, except for Iron Lad, who will copy an ongoing card. So maximum Spectrum value here. We have Ravonna to reduce the cost of our powerful top end, like Iron Man and Professor X. I do think X is going to be one of the better ways for a deck like this to succeed, being able to lock down a lane, especially as early as turn 4 with either Ravonna or Iron Lad hitting X. Seems like a good way to close one out and then boost up another lane with your Spectrum or your Iron Man. Luke Cage as usual to turn off the downside of our Lizard, our Man-Thing, our US Agent. Mobius to deal with opposing cost reduction strategies. I think Loki's a big one that comes to mind, but also good against stuff like Sarah. Zabu to make our 4s a little bit cheaper, and just because he's a good ongoing 2-drop. We haven't really had a plethora of good ongoing 2-drops in the past, but now we got like 4 of them here. They're all pretty stat effective or have a very powerful ability. Ant-Man might be kind of tricky to get off sometimes, but when you do, being a 1-5 is really solid, and at worst case, Spectrum makes him a 1-3 anyway, so not too bad. But yeah, this deck's very heavily leaning on the fact that Iron Man and Professor X do a lot of work. Spectrum can help us retake a Professor X lane that the opponent might otherwise think they have gained control of, and Lad really enables the additional high roll a deck like this needs in order to have a chance at succeeding. And that is it for our day 1 decks for US Agent. Let me know what you think about the card in the comments below. As usual, links will be in the description if you want to grab any of the decks for yourself. But again, I really can't stress enough that I do not think this is a card that is worth getting for the majority of the player base, especially if resources are tight. And honestly, Man-Thing was Series 4. This card should have been a Series 4, but apparently Series 4 card releases just aren't a thing anymore. That's going to wrap it up for this one, though. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.